everybody, it's James Lindsay. You're listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a short bullet point-like explanation of a single topic relevant to woke that we need to understand so we can defeat it. I want to talk about freedom of speech. I think we need to talk about freedom of speech. There's a lot of people throwing around, you're censoring me, this is censorship. Well, is it? What is censorship? What does the freedom of speech entail? Obviously we could talk about the First Amendment. We could read the First Amendment and do it that way, but I just kind of want to talk about it in a more general philosophical sense, what the freedom of speech is. I'm not going to really talk about what it's for even. I think, that's an admirable topic and worthy of diving into. But I actually just want to break down the freedom of speech itself for people, because a lot of people seem to be confused about it. And they, everything I don't like is cancellation, or everything I don't like is censorship. Now, actually, censorship exists, and a lot of us have experienced it in the past few years. It's real, but that doesn't mean that everything having to do with talking in, in certain public places is censorship. And same thing with cancellation. It's real. We've experienced it, but not everything is cancellation. So we've got to be discerning. So the point of this is actually a message that I gave in a essay that I wrote a very long time ago with Helen Pluckrose. This has to go back to 17 maybe. It's a very long time ago. We broke down the freedom of speech. And basically the freedom of speech includes 4 fundamental rights. Okay? There are 4 parts to the freedom of speech. And then there are lots of things people seem to think it does include that it does not include. Okay, so what does the freedom of speech include? Number 1, you have the freedom to speak. You get to say things that you want to say. There are actually reasonable limits on that. However, even in the very expansive First Amendment United States circumstance, that we don't count incitement to violence, threats, harassment, slander, libel are not protected speech. But the first piece of the freedom of speech is the freedom to speak. You might, in a kind of very generic way, often said after somebody says something stupid, sometimes after somebody says something brave, it's a free country, I can say what I want. Well, within those limits that I just described, yes, you can. So the freedom to speak is the freedom to speak. You get to say what you want. That includes writing. You can write what you want, again, subject to the same limits. You can't libel people. You can't threaten them. You cannot incite violence. Turns out, because what constitutes hate speech is subjective, at least in sane places that value the freedom of speech, like the United States, that's totally protected speech. You can be as hateful as you want as long as you're not inciting violence, slandering, libel, harassing, etc. So you have the freedom to speak, but in addition to the freedom to speak, you have the freedom to hear. So if, let's say, I'm invited to speak somewhere and you are interested in hearing me, you have the freedom to hear the arguments that you would like to hear. You don't have the freedom to hear the arguments that you would like to hear wherever you want to hear them, just like you have no right to expect me to show up in your living room and tell you the arguments. You can't expect me to show up at your favorite conference and deliver the arguments. And the conference organizer has no obligation to invite me to deliver the arguments at the place of your choosing. But you have the freedom to hear the arguments that you want, given that you are going to possibly have to do some legwork to be able to get access to hear them. You don't have freedom to access to information under the freedom of speech. You have the freedom not to miss out on the opportunity to hear the things that you want to hear. So, for example, if somebody busts in the room while I'm giving my speech and starts screaming through a megaphone, or pulls the fire alarm, or otherwise engages in the heckler's veto, or that I have been duly invited to speak and they create some scene or some, chaos that cancels my invitation to speak against the wishes of the organizers, then your freedom to possibly hear me has been abrogated. So it turns out the heckler's veto is not part of the freedom of speech either. And because you're violating the right of the people in the audience to hear the thing that they came to hear. So you have a freedom to speak and you have a freedom to hear. I should really elaborate on those. Like I said, within the limits of the law, you have the freedom to say what you will and you have the freedom to hear what you will, but you may have to do some legwork in both cases. If you want to hear something, you have to get in a position where you can hear it. That includes reading, by the way. You have the freedom to read what you want to read. However, you might have to do the legwork to obtain it. On the other hand, you have the freedom to say whatever you want, but you don't have any entitlement to an audience. So not even just in private quarters, outside of being a public nuisance, which can also be an illegal thing, you have to be able to generate the opportunity for you to say things to certain groups of people. I have no right to just barge into whatever, town hall meeting or church or conference and just start yelling on the stage. I have a freedom to speak, but not there. I haven't earned that right. You have to earn it. So there may be legwork involved in being able to say what you will where you want to or where people can hear it. You're not guaranteed those things. You just are guaranteed that when you say things, so long as you don't violate laws about incitement, harassment, slander, libel, and so on, that you can say or write what you will. And you can choose to hear what you will. So you have the freedom to speak as you will, the freedom to hear as you will. You also have the freedom not to speak. So there are two negative freedoms here that are very, very important. You have the freedom not to speak. So if, in fact, this is in the Fifth Amendment of the American Constitution, if you are asked a question, you don't have to answer it. You're under no obligation to do so. If somebody says you have to affirm BLM, you don't have to. If they say you have to say specifically Black Lives Matter, whether you believe that statement in its, prima facie way or you understand that it's coded, you still don't have to say it in either case. You can believe it or not believe it, and it's not even an indicative state of belief. You can not say things that you feel like you're being compelled to say. You can keep your silence when you want to. A lot more people could exercise that particular freedom sometimes. The old saying, I think Mark Twain is attributed to it, something about, you could have remained silent and nobody would have known you were a fool, but you opened your mouth and removed all doubt or something like that. So, but you have the freedom not to speak in addition to the freedom to speak. Of course, those are two sides of the same coin. When I said you have the freedom to speak as you will, not speaking is included in as you will. So just like you have the freedom to hear what you would like to hear, which includes reading what you would like to read, again, within the normal limits that I've already mentioned, you have the freedom not to hear. If you don't want to hear something, you don't have to. If a speaker is at an event, at a conference or a church or whatever, speaking, and you don't like what they're saying, you can leave. You don't have to listen. You're under no obligation. Nobody is able to force you to listen to things, to coerce you into listening to things that you don't want to hear. So you have these four fundamental freedoms: freedom to speak, freedom to hear, freedom not to speak, so no compulsion on speech, and freedom not to hear. Now, like I said, there are limits to this, and there is another side to the story, which are things that people often think are freedom of speech that are not. So as I already mentioned a bunch of times, so I don't want to bog it down by going through them all again too much, I'll just mention again: incitement to violence, threats, slander, libel, defamation, harassment. Those kinds of things are not actually protected speech. You cannot do those. There are limits. There's actually limits within the range of obscenity as well. You can actually not lose your freedom to articulate your ideas, but to do so in particular places under public nuisance laws, or due to, like if you're standing on a street corner bothering people with a bullhorn, you very well may be asked to go away for disturbing the peace. Your freedom of speech has not been violated for doing that. You are disturbing the peace. Because the freedom of speech does not include some things, and one of those is a right to any particular platform. You might think that you own the block and that street corner where you like to yell with your bullhorn is yours. It's public property. It's not yours. You actually do not have a unfettered right to occupy that space and bother people from it. You do not have the right to access to any particular platform. So let's say that, Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk hold a big giant conference like America Fest or their Student Action Summit or their Believers Summit or whatever else they do, these huge things, the People's Convention last year. Let's say that they hold one of these and they decide they don't like a speaker, maybe yours truly, and they don't invite you to speak. They did not violate your right to free speech. They are under no obligation to invite anybody to speak. It doesn't matter if they've spoken there lots of times in the past. It doesn't matter if they might speak there again in the future. It doesn't matter what the reason. You're not entitled to speak on their stage. And so if somebody you expect to have speak at, say, Turning Point is not there, that's not a violation of anybody's freedom of speech. It is, in fact, kind of by extension, Turning Point's freedom of speech to decide what speech they will allow on their stage. Okay, so you don't have access to any particular platform. You don't have a right to a platform. You don't have a right to be on anybody's podcast. If somebody doesn't want you on the podcast, if somebody even records a podcast with you and decides not to release it, they have not violated your freedom of speech because it's their platform. That's not really that tricky to understand. If somebody gets blowback because they had a speaker who said something, way out there or objectionable or awful or terrible or crazy, that's freedom of speech being used back, right? That is not an abrogation of anybody's freedom of speech. The speech happened, let's say, on the stage or on the podcast. People got upset and they used their speech to say that was a bunch of crap. And people should maybe not pay attention to your outfit anymore. Maybe they should boycott you. Maybe if you're a donor, you shouldn't donate anymore. All of that's free speech. Free speech was engaged in. People didn't like it. They engaged in their free speech. Nobody's right to free speech was taken away from them by means of that particular set of complaints. So you do not have a right to any particular platform. You also don't have a right to be heard at all. And this was actually the essence of the article that Helen and I wrote way back, 17 or 18 or whatever it was. It was called Freedom of Speech and the Right to be Heard. You don't have a right to be heard. Okay? You can go speak all you want. You can tweet or post on X all you want. You can post on Instagram all you want. You can post on Facebook all you want. You can go on whatever social media, whatever YouTube channel, go on whatever space will have you where you're not being a public nuisance or violating any of these other things like somebody's, charging onto the stage and speaking at a Turning Point conference when you weren't invited would be not okay. You can speak anywhere that you're invited to speak, but nobody has to listen to you and nobody has to invite you in the first place. You do not have a right to be heard. Now, where does this come up the most often in real life? Online. So let's say that somebody, will use me, post something on social media and you find it objectionable. And then you reply to me with stuff that annoys me. Maybe it's even rude. Maybe it's actually nasty. Maybe it's, in my opinion, which is my opinion, hateful. And I don't want to be exposed to it. I don't want to see your comments anymore. So I mute or block you. I have not taken away your right to free speech. I have exercised my freedom not to hear, which is my free speech. Do you understand? Your free speech has not been taken away because somebody on social media blocked you. You might or might not have deserved it, but you have not lost your freedom to speak because you do not have a freedom to speak to that person. So if you want to speak to me, that's fine. You may try, you may ask, you may just shoot your shot on social media, but I have no obligation to hear you. I am under no obligation to listen to you. You do not have a right to be heard. You have a right to speak. And I have the right not to hear you. So if you block somebody on social media and they cry, he's censoring me, no, that's not censorship. You can't censor somebody who can still speak all they want, just not to you. All you're doing is putting up a boundary. It's completely different. So you don't have a right to be heard. You don't have a right to access to somebody else's platform or any particular platform, including a public street corner, because you might be a public nuisance. You also don't have the right to speak or hear, and then focus more on the hearing side here, specifically where you may want to. I might want to speak at, say, the Turning Point Conference or, at the White House. That would be kind of cool, wouldn't it? Or, on the moon or whatever. But I don't have a right to speak wherever I want. I have to actually earn the place to do it. It would be great to go on all these cool big shows and big podcasts and whatever that means and get my message out. However, I don't have a right to do that. I have to be invited. I have to be asked. Or if I want to speak at my own table, at my own conference, I can host a fancy dinner where I speak. I can put on a conference, and I can try to get people who might want to hear it to come to me. Nobody has taken away my freedom of speech by saying I can't speak at, say, a Turning Point conference this year. I do not have a right to speak where I want to speak. But that goes a little further too. You don't have a right to hear something where you think you want to. I don't care what you think you want to hear at somebody's conference. Somebody else's conference. My conference, Charlie Kirk's conference. I don't care whose conference it is. So-and-so's podcast. You do not have a right to hear what you want to hear on their platform. You have a right to hear what you're willing to engage with, but you have to go find what it is. So there is no entitlement to a platform, whether it's a platform to speak or a platform to listen, and you have no right to be heard. If you're speaking at a conference and everybody in the room wants to stick their fingers in their ear and say la 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 and not listen to a word you say the entire time, that's within their rights, specifically their freedom not to hear, which is a part of their fundamental freedom of speech. So do you understand the difference here? There are limits to free speech. Slander, harassment, libel, threats, incitement, possibly not specifically about the speech, but being a public nuisance may prevent you from speaking in a particular place. Rights to private property will prevent you from speaking on particular platforms. Even if you have spoken, so to speak, on the platform, they are under no obligation to release it, and so on. But the freedom of speech includes 4 essential parts, which are the freedom to speak or not, and the freedom to hear or not. The freedom to say what you will or hold your tongue, the freedom to hear or read what you would like or not be compelled to. That's what the freedom of speech is actually about. Don't get it twisted. Try to keep it simple. I hope this has been clarifying. I know this is really basic and it's kind of beneath us, but it's helpful sometimes to kind of go through the basics again and hear it again, because people are slipping and people are tripping, and all over the internet people are screaming censorship and freedom of speech stuff has nothing to do with freedom of speech. Once again, if somebody on social media blocked you, tough cookies. You're not censored. Your freedom of speech is fully intact. Go on your merry way. Do the best you can. Stop being butthurt.